Howdy folks, Little John, and time to sit down and have a little bit of a chat. Middle of the week, so it's not so much a 5 on Friday, but a 5 on Wednesday. You'll get that when we're in isolation and days sort of roll into one. So anyway, today's chat brought to us with help from Roland's Tennessee Sour Mash Whiskey. Anyway, so what I'm chatting about today flows on a little bit from the last chat about focus more on newer brewers. I said, following up from those 7 tips for getting a good brew, getting it underway. And this is one that's you just see coming up all the time. The questions just constantly, and that is, how do I know if my brew is ready to bottle, or how do I know if it's finished? And for most brewers, particularly when you're starting out, it's probably the most nerve-wracking and hardest thing to get your head around and get some understanding of. Just how do I know if that beer is ready to go to a bottle? We've all, everyone's heard the stories of, know of people, who've had bottles blowing up in the shed or in the garage, in the laundry, missus going off a bloody head. Whether it's the old bloke down the road, old Uncle Charlie, or the old fellow across the road. There's always people that are blowing up bottles for all sorts of different reasons. So new brewers are very worried about that, and they're also keen and eager to get that first brew in the bottle so they can drink it. You're making this wonderful potion of brew at home, and it's all exciting, and you just want to get into it, so you want to be able to get a bottle. But then you're worried, oh, am I doing it right? Is it ready? Am I gonna ruin me brew if I get it off too early, or if I leave it too long, or I don't know what it should look like. So we're gonna have a bit of a yak about that. But the biggest problem I think the most new brewers face when it comes to this subject, trying to work out when their brewer's done, is that quite often you're starting off with a kit. You buy a can that tells you, blah blah, add your sugar and stick it in your fermenter and put your yeast in and let it go at 21 to 27 degrees or whatever it is, and invariably it says bottle after 5 days, or when your gravity's stable over 2 days. Now that means 2/3 of sweet fuck all to a new brewer. What exactly does what are gravity readings, and how does that work? And day 5, what's that? And still, it gets to day 5, but does me brew? They're looking at it. Does it look right? Does it? And the other bit of information you'll quite often get when you're starting it is that you need to wait till the airlock stops bubbling. Now, that airlock advice, and going back to the previous video with the 7 tips. The airlock itself is the most troublesome bit of gear in home brew. Essentially, the airlock is only on your brew to stop air from getting into the fermenter while it's brewing, to stop oxidation, and help stop bugs from getting in there as well. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether your beer is fermenting, is not fermenting, hasn't finished fermenting. So you've got a lot of brewers that are going off that airlock as their indication. And they're going, okay, 5 days, the airlock. And the airlock, might have stopped after 3 days. Now, and they're thinking, okay, I'm ready to go. 3 days, well, that's good. That's been nice and quick. And quite often when you are starting out and you are brewing just on in the garage, in the shed, just on the bench, and it's quite often it is warmer than the ideal. Which I'll throw a link up to the video on fermentation, which does talk about temperature and the time of an ideal ferment, but I don't want to go too much into that at the moment. But you've got that warmer temp with the kit yeast, and quite often those brews will be done in 3 days. They've finished they've fermented all the sugars that are available in the beer, and this is wherein is the issue. And the same with the 5 days, if you've got the temperature's not quite as warm. Just because the yeast has stopped actively fermenting all the sugars and there's not much going on, doesn't mean your beer's ready to bottle. There's things that will go on beyond the initial fermentation. Yeast will blow through 90% of sugars in a couple of days. They'll blow through about 70% in the first 48 to 72 hours, depending on the conditions in which you're fermenting in. But it's not uncommon for most brews done with a standard sort of a yeast at normal sort of temperatures to get most of the ferment done in the first 3 or 4 days, and then finish off over 2 to 3 from that. But it's best for that yeast to go a little bit longer. So when that yeast slows down and gets past that sort of that 70% mark and it starts getting into the tail end of the sugars, it's starting to work on more difficult sugars to eat, and so it's not as active. So if you've got one of these newer, clearer Cooper's fermenters where for the first couple of days you can see stuff moving around and it's dancing around in the fermenter, and you can see that there's stuff going on, or your airlock's bubbling away if you've got that sort of fermenter. Suddenly that sort of 4 and 5 days in, that activity has slowed down, you're not really seeing anything, there's no bubbling going through your fermenter. So when that activity is slowed, you can't see what's going on, it's easy to think, okay, we've finished. But that yeast is working on, it's working on those harder sugars for it to eat. So it's not as much going on. So it's still working, it's still got gravity, it's still got points it's got to eat away before it's finished. And then once it's finished eating those sugars, it still needs to clean up the byproducts. Yeast eats sugar, makes alcohol, and also makes other crap. Once it's finished eating the sugars, it will then go along and find that crap that's already made, and it will consume that as well and get rid of it. So it cleans up a lot of the muck that is put into the brew as part of that ferment. So if you don't let it run to do that, you end up with those unwanted stuff still in the brew when you're bottling. So if you're rushing in, then you're not giving the yeast a chance to do that sort of stuff properly. And again, look at some other videos on yeast and what it's sort of doing. But just be aware of what it is sort of doing initially. So the only way to know for sure if your beer is finished is to use your hydrometer. Take a sample in your tube. Get a tube. Don't stick this in the top of your fermenter. Get your tube. You should get a tube. If you've got a kit, you've got a tube. And you stick that in. Now I haven't got any beer to worry about, but again, it's not a lesson on hydrometers. But use that. Check that. If your brew is finished, you will get steady readings on this. Now you see quite often I'll say, if you get 2 readings the same over 2 days, you're good to bottle. I really don't like that advice. It is very non-specific and to some degree fraught with danger. I've had plenty of brews that have got down around final gravity. They've sat there for 2 days and then ticked away again, and pull off an extra 2 or 3 points of gravity over the next week. So I suggest that you get a reading after 5 or 7 days, whichever one you might feel comfortable with. Now, taking readings, you do lose some beer, so the less you take, the better. But it's up to the individual. I know when I first started brewing, I took gravity readings every single day. I kept the record of them in my brew log. I tracked the gravity, I tracked the temperature, and it's good in a way, because I know from that, by looking at it, that you do get that big drops, and then suddenly it slows down, and then all but stops, and it just ticks away for 4, 5, 6, 7 days to drop those last 3 or 4 points. It'll drop 30 points in 4 days, and then it'll take twice that amount of time to drop the last 4. So you need to allow for that. So take a reading, wait 2 days, take another reading, wait 2 more days, take another reading. If your last reading is the same as your first reading, then you're pretty well right to go. If it's not, take another one, and make sure you've got the same reading 4 days apart. Not just the 2 days, but 4 days. Not the reading before, the one before that. Make sure they're the same, because that's going to give you a good indication of whether you're still ticking away. Now, it's not a lot of points, but it will make a difference to your finished beer. And at the end of the day, it's realistically, you're only adding 4 to 6 days onto the amount of time before your bottle. Now, this should push you out to somewhere between 10 and 14 days from initially making your beer to when you're bottling. I like 14 days. 14 days is a good mark. I prefer 21. That's other videos. It's not, and you don't want to get into that just at the moment. You just want to be bottling good beer so you can get it, taste it, drink it, enjoy it, and then move on. Then you can start looking at more things as you go and getting better at what you're doing in your process. But initially, I know you want to get beer. You want it in the bottle. You want to drink it. So go for that target, 10 to 14 days with those couple of readings in between. Your beer will be better. It will finish cleaner. The beer will drop out a little bit. Now, I'm talking here a brew that's just going to sit on your bench from the time you start it to the time you bottle it. It's not under temperature control. It doesn't get any cold crashing. It's just straight up. It sits at ambient temperature for 2 weeks. That beer will clear up as it sits there. If you choose to use gelatin in your brew, do so. I don't completely recommend it normally, but if you aren't cold crashing, if you aren't using temperature control, which most people aren't when they're starting, then gelatin is not a bad idea. Drop it in 2 days before you're bottling. So when you get that final reading where it is the same, and you're happy with that, drop in your findings. Go and find the video on that as well to explain that process. It's fairly simple, and it's worthwhile. I said, if you haven't got temperature control and the ability to cold crash your brew, it will help your beer to be a little bit clearer and a little bit cleaner as well. But that's it. That's the long and short. The only thing you need to worry about is that gravity reading. Now, there is just an add-on with that, and that is that gravity reading needs to be around the point that it's expected to be. Without going long-winded, it is quite common for beginner brewers to pitch their yeast at temperatures that aren't ideal and cause it damage, or to underpitch the amount, not use enough yeast for the brew they're making, and the yeast doesn't have enough cells, enough numbers to eat all the sugar in the beer, and it will what's called stall, or it will just finish out before all the sugar's gone. That's a hard one to work out exactly when you're starting where you should be. But if you're using a standard kit can and the ingredients it tells you to use on the side, it will give you an idea. It should tell you roughly what your expected original gravity and final gravity is. So you should be getting somewhere in those sort of ranges. And your expected final gravity on a lot of kit beers, like it's sort of 108, 110. If you're at 1.020 from a standard kit beer and a kilo of sugar or a sugar mix, then you're not finished fermenting, and there's an issue. You need to let it go longer, or you need to look at what your process, because you've done something wrong. And again, that's yeast, it's a whole different subject. There's videos on that as well. So steady gravity readings over a couple of days in the range, in a range that you're expecting it to be. When you take your sample, and always take it out of your tap. When you take your sample, if your beer's done, it will be relatively clear and it won't be real foamy. It might get a little bit of like a head on top, but it won't have gas bubbles, too many gas bubbles coming up through it. You'll notice if you're fermenting, there will be gas bubbles rising up, and it'll have a fairly good head on it. That beer will clear as it's going. So you've got those three things. You've got that clear beer in your thing. You're good to bottle. Go ahead and bottle up. Give it 3 or 4 weeks and get into it and have a go. It'll be good. Be your first beer or your second beer or whatever it is. But it's going to be fully fermented. It's not going to taste yeasty. It's not going to taste of alcohol or vinegar because you've left unwanted chemicals in the brew. It's going to taste like beer, and hopefully it's something you're going to enjoy and you'll be happy to share with people. The most important thing is it'll be a starting point on a journey that we all hope is a long one, that leads you to learning more and improving and making better and better beer and more styles as you go. But anyway, that's about all I'm going to really go on the subject. If you've got any questions, any comments, stick them down the bottom. I'll happily answer any questions. Like I said, the whole point of Little John was always to help new brewers become good brewers, and good brewers become better brewers. That's what it's all about. So if I can help anybody out, yeah, that's what I'm here to do. To the Patreons, who are probably possibly I've lost them a little bit by now, because this is a little bit maybe a bit more basic than what they're after. But anyway, Patreons, cheers. Anyone new, if you're interested, check out Patreon. Subscribe to the channel. There's plenty here, plenty to learn, and there's always something new to learn. But other than that, that's me, Little John. So, till I'm looking at you again, we're drinking beer, we're brewing beer, or we're talking beer, good brewing.